Brandon Aiyuk officially requested a trade from the San Francisco 49ers yesterday, and we talk about how the Ravens could potentially pull off a near impossible move to acquire him. We talk about that, if it's realistic, and so much more coming up next here on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of Locked On Ravens. We are your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, and I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher, Ravens Wire, here with you as always on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Thank you so much for being here, making us a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. So if you're here on YouTube in video form, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you decide to listen to your favorite podcast, we have you covered there as well. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a booster or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We have a jam-packed episode today. Didn't really know where this one was going to take us. There wasn't really a ton of news. We talked about Lamar showing up to camp yesterday, injuries, but we got Brandon Aiyuk requesting a trade from the San Francisco 49ers. And who better to talk about that with us than IngravenVids? Ingraven, we were planning on doing this, and we didn't really know how it was going to go. And then we got the news dropping of Aiyuk requesting out of San Francisco. Obviously would be a big-time get for Baltimore if they could pull it off, but we'll talk about it throughout the show. Baltimore's at an interesting spot with their wide receiver core, and we'll see what they end up doing with Aiyuk. But for now, I think this team is set up with their youth, but another veteran I don't think would hurt anybody.
Oh, no, especially at the wide receiver position. Because I feel like right now with the Ravens, like you have Zay Flowers. He's not all the way proven, because I think for somebody to really be a proven receiver, it's all about consistency, but he's off to a great start. Zay Flowers was amazing last year as a rookie, so he's well on his way. But then you have Rashad Bateman. Big question mark with Rashad Bateman. We don't know exactly what we're going to get from Rashad Bateman. Number one, first and foremost, hopefully he's healthy. And then, of course, number two, well, not even number two, sort of 1A, 1B. We just hope that all those flashes, the flash plays that we've seen from Rashad Bateman throughout his career, we hope that the Ravens and Lamar and Bateman and Monken, they can all come together and capitalize on those flashes and really make it who Rashad Bateman is. And there can be that level of consistency throughout the regular season for Rashad Bateman. And hopefully they can all put it all together. But then outside of that, it's Nelson Agholor. And I feel like we know who we're getting with Nelson Agholor. But then there's Tez Walker. He's a rookie. Then there's Tylan Wallace. He hasn't really had much playing time on offense. And I wouldn't expect him to get much playing time now, especially him being sort of a fourth, fifth wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens. Well, about a fourth, fifth wide receiver for the Baltimore Ravens, especially with them being a run-dominant team. And then you still got Isaiah Likely, Mark Andrews, and even the running backs possibly catching passes as well. But the Ravens wide receiver unit is a lot more questions than answers. With Brandon Aiyuk, he would make a unit that's questionable. He would make them pretty strong, because if you would then add him to the Baltimore Ravens mix at wide receiver, to go from Rashad Bateman being your number two to being your number three, that'd be nice right there. That'd be a nice move right there. So Brandon Aiyuk would essentially be taking over as a number one, and Zay Flowers sort of 1A, 1B with those two. It could be really, really nice. And he would just bring that presence, that consistency. He just continued to improve with his numbers every single year that he's been with the 49ers. Now, the past 2 seasons, he's got over 1,000 yards. 2 seasons ago, he got 1,000. Last year, he got 1,300. And I don't think it would be realistic to expect, if the Baltimore Ravens were to give to Brandon Aiyuk, I don't think it'll be realistic to expect him to get those numbers with the Baltimore Ravens, because it seems as if with their passing offense, it's more about efficiency than it is with volume. But under Todd Monken, it seemed like they sort of going in a direction of doing a little bit more of both when it comes to volume, getting more yards, more passing attempts here and there, but then still working on that efficiency too. So with Brandon Aiyuk, I wouldn't expect him to still get those numbers that he got in San Francisco, but he could still be nice for the Ravens, and a really nice get for the Ravens, and just add another weapon to make defenses have that much more of a headache.
Yeah, and I agree with you. If they were able to pull this off, this receiver room would really your top 4, even 5 with Tez Walker, if you throw him in there, would be something to be reckoned with. And that's not even including guys like Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely and the running backs like you talked about there. But in terms of how the Ravens could pull this thing off, the Ravens right now have about $6-ish million in cap space. Obviously, Brandon Aiyuk's going to want a little more than that, Ingraven, just a little more than that, especially with how we saw Justin Jefferson just get paid by Minnesota. Now, his 5th-year option, if they were to acquire him right now, that falls right in the range of about $14-ish million. So they'd have to move some money around elsewhere. Now, the good thing is they do that. They still have restructured candidates. Lamar Jackson obviously being the most likely and the biggest out of those, but then you also have Marlon Humphrey, Mark Andrews, Roquan Smith, et cetera, et cetera. You can make enough money work to move it around so that you could get him on that 14. Now, the big thing is the extension. That's what everybody's talking about, where he is probably going to want 30+ million. And in an offense like Baltimore's, where you talked about back-to-back 1,000-yard receiver, the way this Ravens offense works, he's probably not putting up those types of numbers. And that's a conversation we have had, obviously, dating back to the Greg Roman era with Todd Monken. I think it's a little different, but this team is still a run-first team. Now, that doesn't mean don't go out there and get Lamar Jackson weapons. They absolutely should. And to me, Aiyuk is a player that can change the dynamic of this entire group. But for me, how they could pull it off is, first of all, from the money perspective, you got to move some stuff around. But then we get into the draft capital aspect too, because it's not just about the money. It's about, well, what is Baltimore willing to give up? I think this probably starts at a 1st-round pick. If not, other high draft capital. Maybe you throw a player like Rashad Bateman in there. If they're willing to part with that for a player like Brandon Aiyuk and fork up the money to a wide receiver like Aiyuk, who I think, again, he's going to earn money and rightfully so, that's how they pull this off. But Ingraven, what do you think the most realistic path is for them? Do you think that they'd be willing to give up the draft capital and give that extension to him at the end of the day?
That's a tough question, because you know these Baltimore Ravens, like paying premium at the wide receiver position, it's not something that they really do. They'll take their swings through the draft at wide receiver, like speaking of Rashad Bateman, 1st-round pick, Hollywood Brown, 1st-round pick, and then we were just talking about Zay Flowers too. Another 1st-round pick at wide receiver. But as far as paying that hefty dollar for a wide receiver, that's just not something that they typically do. Now, last year, they stepped out of their comfort zone in a big way when they signed Odell Beckham Jr. to that one-year, $15 million deal worth up to $18 million. And when they signed him for that much, I said, whoa, that's not Baltimore Ravens at all. So that was a nice step in the right direction, in my opinion. But would they be willing to, give up both draft capital and the big contract? I honestly don't think, not that they wouldn't have to, but I don't think it would even take a 1st round. The reason being, because you are the one that has to pay the money. Like Brandon Aiyuk, he requested a trade not because he doesn't like San Francisco, not because he doesn't like the team, doesn't like the system, doesn't like the scheme, doesn't like the quarterback. No, he's cool with all those things, but this is just about the money. This is just business. So he requested a trade out because y'all didn't want to meet his salary demands. So whenever that ends up happening, typically, normally, that drops whatever the price is of that player, because if the player doesn't want to play for you because you just simply don't want to pay him, then you normally take a little bit less than maybe something that you would want for that player. So I honestly think that they could get, whether it's the Ravens or somebody else, they could get Brandon Aiyuk for maybe like a 2nd and change, a 2nd and the 4th and the 5th and the 6th, or a 2nd and change. I think a 2nd is not necessarily the highest that they could get. I think they could get a 1st from somebody who's willing, and especially if it gets into a bidding war. But I think that a 2nd and some change would be able to do it, because you got to pay him a lot of money. And right now, San Francisco, they just not looking to do that.
Yeah, and what the Ravens might even say here, Ingraven, is something along the lines of, well, you want a 1st-round pick? Well, hey, we have this former 1st-round pick here in Rashad Bateman. And I don't know if Baltimore – I don't even know if he's eligible to be traded at this point, honestly, because of the extension. I'm not sure how that whole trade thing works. But let's assume that the Ravens could throw him into this deal. You know, maybe it's a second, and the change you're talking about is a Rashad Bateman type of player. Would you move off of Bateman for Aiyuk, or do you think that him on that deal in this offense with that potential is something that you would like to see paired up with Brandon Aiyuk and Zay Flowers in that offense?
Yeah, if it's me, I want to keep everybody and I want to get everybody. But my preference would be that they keep Rashad Bateman. Because it's been frustrating with Bate. Because, again, we talked about it earlier. You've seen the flashes. You've seen the potential. You see it. It's a matter of putting it all together. But the thing with that is, the thing that's so tricky and so dangerous about that is that you don't want to just wait on hope when it comes to Rashad Bateman. You don't want to just wait on, all right, what it could possibly be. I feel like the Baltimore Ravens, they can't just put all their eggs into the Rashad Bateman basket. It does seem like that may be the route that they're taking from this offseason. Like they moved on from Odell Beckham Jr. They didn't draft a wide receiver in this year's draft. Well, at least early. They did draft Tez Walker, but they didn't draft the starter. So you got Zay Flowers. You drafted him last year, and you kept Rashad Bateman. You kept Nelson Aguilar as well. But they re-signed him to a modest deal. It's just a 1-year deal with the dead money. I mean, the void year on the back of it. Right. But you didn't make any moves that say, all right, Rashad Bateman, move into the back of the line. No, everything that the Baltimore Ravens did this offseason showed like, all right, Rashad, we really rolling with you. You're going to be our guy. And for them to even give him sort of a financial commitment, it wasn't a crazy financial commitment, but to get that contract extension, that was big for Rashad Bateman. So it seemed like they want to roll with him. So it's like, okay. But I think it is just scary territory for the Ravens to be approaching it like that, in my opinion. That's why I would be all over this Brandon Aiyuk move. I would love if they were to do it. And he could accompany Rashad Bateman, accompany Zay Flowers, accompany Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely to give that Lamar Jackson just that many more weapons.
I think he would be, that final infinity stone you put in there to that Ravens offense. Absolute star player and someone that could really help this team. Coming up, though, we'll continue talking about Brandon Aiyuk, how realistic it is, and if the Ravens acquire him, would that sacrifice some other younger players on the roster in terms of extensions? Stay tuned. We got a lot to get to here on the show. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much I never want them to stop. As the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. In the summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. So the Orioles getting back into full swing after the All-Star break ends in a couple of days. Gunnar Henderson is in the MVP conversation. If you want to get in on those odds, FanDuel's the place for you. Plus, for football, the Ravens open up as 2.5-point underdogs to the Kansas City Chiefs in Week 1. If you want to get on that, FanDuel, again, head over there. Head over to FanDuel and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner, Major League Baseball. We're back. Our second segment, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostreicher and IngravenVids still rocking out with you here on this midweek edition of the show. Thank you to everybody again for tuning in today and making Locked On Ravens a part of your day. Now, Ingraven, I kind of teased it there at the end of the first segment, but with Brandon Aiyuk, we know the money's going to be a big factor. I mean, you mentioned it. That's why this is all happening right now. The 49ers aren't willing to meet what he wants in a long-term contract. Now, if Baltimore gets there, if they decide Brandon Aiyuk is a guy they want to acquire, they acquire him, and then they sign him to the extension, we know that with Lamar on his big deal, because a lot of these teams, probably other teams like maybe Pittsburgh, who has Russell Wilson on his very cheap deal, or some of these other teams with rookie quarterbacks, it's a different avenue for them to acquire Brandon Aiyuk. With other teams like the Ravens who have those quarterbacks on big deals, it's a little more difficult to squeeze that salary into their cap sheet. Now, we do know that some guys will likely come off the books in a big way for Baltimore in the next couple of seasons. Ronnie Stanley restructured his deal. He's going to be a free agent after this season. There are going to begin to become questions about Marlon Humphrey's contract and what the Ravens do with him over these next couple of years, which is a whole different conversation. But there's not necessarily no room for the Ravens to make this work, but there is a possibility if they do acquire him we look kind of down the pipeline, Ingraven. You got guys like Zay Flowers and Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum, and that list goes on in terms of young players who are going to need big money extensions. And a big money extension of Brandon Aiyuk could potentially hinder that. So is that acquisition, if it happens, worth it if it means you have to maybe let one of those guys walk or trade them because there's not enough money to go around?
No. And as much as it pains me to say it, no, it wouldn't be. If at that point, and especially when you put it like that, that could make even more sense why they would roll with Rashad Bateman the way that they've been rolling with Rashad Bateman, because of how it impacts everybody else who they have coming up. After this year, Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum, they're eligible to be paid. Because this will be their third year, and yeah, they'll be eligible to get their bread. Now, it doesn't mean the Ravens are going to do it right away. I'm sure they may want to take their time. It's a tricky situation because it's like while they're eligible to get paid, it's like, man, let's just wait it out. But if you wait it out, do the whole 5th-year option thing, yeah, you could do that. But the prices for both of them are they're only going to go up for Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum. Like, they're only going up. Both of them two are just amazing, phenomenal players. They were literally perfect draft picks from a couple of years ago. So yeah, if that's the case, then it's like, no, I just you can't do it if it means losing one of those guys.
Yeah, it'd be too much at that point. I mean, not only are you giving up the draft capital to get Aiyuk, but if you lose one of those guys, that's essentially trading Tyler Linderbaum and draft capital for Brandon Aiyuk. And Aiyuk's a great player. I'd love him on the team. I know you and I have talked about it before, Ingraven, but I do think there is a limit to just like how many sacrifices the Ravens would have to make. And I think in terms of sacrifices, the Ravens have always been a team to keep draft pick close to the vest, especially those high-end ones, first rounders, second rounders. I think when they traded that second for Roquan, everybody was like shocked. They're like, oh, the Ravens actually did it. They actually went out there and they traded a high-level draft pick, and look, that deal worked out, and I do it 20 times out of 10.
Right.
But I know that for this team, especially with the conversation we just had about Lamar on that big contract, they have to be able to hit on their draft picks and hit on vet minimum signings. And that's the way that they build their team around a big money quarterback, which they've never had to done before, not at least at this precedent with Lamar's deal. But with Aiyuk in the fold, if it were to happen, with him, with Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, the list goes on and on and on. There has been the conversation about them being a run-first team, maybe not having enough targets to go around. Do you think that would be an issue? Because we've talked about that before. I think you and I even have with guys like Stephon Diggs and how that acquisition would have gone for the Ravens. And this is a different era. This is not Greg Roman's offense anymore. This is Todd Monken's group, and I expect them to be more balanced this season. But if you're going to pay $30+ million for a receiver, you have to be able to justify that, in my opinion, with a higher usage rate, which in my opinion means throwing the ball more, which is fine. But do you think the Ravens would get there to the point where it makes it worth it for a guy like Aiyuk to come in?
Oh, they will certainly have to. I mean, and not just in a playoff game. The Baltimore Ravens, of course, we all know regular season, run first team. Of course, they throw the ball as well, but it's super efficient throughout the regular season. But then come playoffs, especially when the Ravens are at the top of the top, they seem to be just not only pass first, but pass only. So if you're going to do that, you know what? Just if you're going to get a wide receiver like Brandon Aiyuk, you're going to pay that money, pay that premium dollar, pay that draft capital, whatever the case may be, whether it's Brandon Aiyuk or even somebody else, then you got to make it worth it. So they will definitely, at that point, they could become a pass-first team or pass-heavy team, still with incorporating the run as well. But I think even like with Derrick Henry, for example, because that's your new running back, I think with him that he's going to produce in the regular season. He's going to do his thing. But I think it still could be one of those things where he shares the workload like the Ravens have been sharing. Now, I don't think he's going to share it as much, but I still think he will share a significant amount of the workload. But you bring in a wide receiver of significance like Brandon Aiyuk, then that takes even less, or that takes even more off of Derrick Henry, and that keeps him and that keeps the Baltimore Ravens that much more fresh come playoff time. They could really just change the game. They could change their game because, like I said before, regular season, run heavy. playoff times, at the worst time, they become pass only. But if they learn how to balance it more in the regular season, or even if the regular season they go pass heavy, and then come playoff time, they're like, oh, we got Derrick Henry and he's fresh. Then they switch it up, catch everybody off guard. That can make them that much more dangerous. So yeah, if they were to acquire Brandon Aiyuk and they paying all that money, then yeah, they better find a way to use him for sure.
Yeah, and again, they would find targets for him, but the theme in this Ravens offense, Ingraven, has been if your name is not Mark Andrews, Marquise Brown, or Zay Flowers, you're probably getting anywhere from 2 to 4 targets a game, 2 to 5. You're gonna like it, and that's what this Ravens offense was. Yeah. So I do think more, and even if we go off on a side tangent about Rashad Bateman, I think he needs to have more targets to get into a flow and into a rhythm if they really want to trust him as the wide receiver too. But the extension conversation and how he's going to be used based off of the money they pay him. We were going to have that conversation with Marquise Brown a couple of years ago. Now, obviously, Marquise Brown made the Ravens decision for them when he requested the trade. But it was about, are you going to go out there and extend Marquise Brown on 15, 20, 25 million per season if their offense is going to be as run heavy as it was under Greg Roman? We'll probably have to have the conversation again with Zay Flowers, depending on how this Ravens offense evolves, because Zay is going to demand, if everything keeps going well for him on the field like it has, he's going to be demanding the way these wide receivers in Graven are getting quarterback money. I mean, that's just how it's going right now. So for Aiyuk, a player that he would be so good. He's a 3-level wide receiver. The catchability is there. His route running is incredible. But to you, do you think this is a realistic move? I know we both are in favor of it happening. Obviously, some circumstances would have to happen in order for it to actually become a thing. Yeah. But I don't see it being very realistic for him with every single hoop that would have to be jumped through. I think it is possible. They can definitely pull it off. There is a path. But do you think they ultimately take that path?
I don't, simply because it's the Baltimore Ravens. Then the biggest issue here, in my opinion, it wouldn't even be the draft capital, it'd be the money. And not that they can't do it, because like you talked about, you mentioned they could move some money around to fit him under the salary. They could move some money around to give him a contract extension. But Ravens are not a team that normally pays top dollar at the wide receiver position. It's just something that they simply just don't do. And you brought up a really, really good point that I hadn't thought about earlier, how it impacts other players who are due for extensions real soon, like a Kyle Hamilton. Like, I ain't losing no Kyle Hamilton, man. Like, forget all that other stuff. I ain't losing super duper Kyle. And then Tyler Linderbaum as well. So when you think about all those, like the long-term impacts, then no. But something I would be willing to do, and I know a lot of people might think that I'm crazy for it, but enough people think I'm crazy already, so that's fine. I would be willing to trade, and Aiyuk, he would, of course, have to approve it, but I would be willing for the Ravens to trade for Brandon Aiyuk and not sign him to a long-term deal, even if they got him as a 1-year rental and then he's a free agent next season. But if they did trade for him, then I would only want them to give up like a second and change. If it was a 1-year rental, I would not mind the Baltimore Ravens doing that at all. And then he becomes a free agent after this year, because that could benefit the Ravens right here, right now, this year. Then they get a 3rd round comp a little bit later, but it would benefit the Ravens because they would have a really good receiver on a team this year. And then could benefit Brandon Aiyuk because he could show like, hey, I did good in San Francisco 49ers system, but I could also do good in this system as well. Then he's a free agent. He gets to choose where he wants to go, get all his bread. So good for him. It's a win-win for both sides, even though I know that he wants to get paid right now. So that probably wouldn't be something that he may want to do, but I would be willing for the Ravens to do that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And honestly, the more you talked about it, the more I think about it, I think I'd be on the same boat. Now, obviously, if you do that, as you talked about, that is not a you trade 2 first-round picks and Rashad Bateman for a 1-year rental. Like, no. you don't do that. Obviously, there would have to be some level. The 49ers aren't going to give you a discount in terms of, oh, we want him for 1 year, we want him for 5. It's going to be the same thing. So you have to be able to get them on that second and change type of deal, maybe a second and a fourth, a second and a third. But we do know that the Ravens, again, that draft capital, it's right up in there, and they have to hit on those picks. But if we know that Aiyuk would improve their Super Bowl chances this upcoming year by tiers. Like, we're going up tiers in terms of where the Ravens could be with Brandon Aiyuk. Do they think that's worth it enough? It'd be essentially Ingraven. I liken that to the mini Los Angeles Rams approach, where it's not, you're not trading everything you have, but you're trading, if it's a second and a third, a little chunk of your mid-round draft capital for that one shot out there in 2024 to be able to go get them. So I think it's an interesting proposition. I like that a lot, actually. When you think about it more and more, the money is the big aspect here. Because 30 plus million, and it's probably going to be ascending, it's going to be a backloaded deal most likely. It might get tough for them to re-sign everybody, especially with Aiyuk on the books with Lamar. So I think that a 1 year rental, I don't think it'd be super popular, but I think it might be the move that if you want Brandon Aiyuk on the team, that might be the reality. And you know what? If he leaves, the Ravens get a third round comp pick back anyway, based off that deal that he's gonna get. So if you trade a second and a third, you get a third back, then it's really only a second if you really do the math and you want to talk about everything that goes on there. Coming up, though, we'll be talking about the Ravens' short-term and long-term plans, how they set themselves up here for 2024, and also down the line, plus getting to some training camp previews and so much more. I got a lot to get to here on Locked On Ravens. First, this episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. And I've had a ton of great experiences over on LinkedIn, whether it's finding jobs, networking. LinkedIn is the place to be. And LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't actively searching for a new job might be open to the perfect role. And a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like professionals on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. And 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. Post your job for free on LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL, LinkedIn.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are back, Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker and IngravenVids still here with you. Ingraven, I know that this Ravens team, every year they don't win the Super Bowl in Lamar Jackson's prime. It's a waste of a year. You can't just be throwing away years like that. And that's why 2023 is such a disappointment for me. I know for you as well, for everybody, because it just felt like the team. Felt like they had the roster, they had the coaching staff, and no two teams are the same, which means we saw a lot of turnover, both coaching-wise and roster-wise. Now, it's been, I shouldn't say overly shocking, but a little. It's been a little shocking about how little the Ravens have done in free agency this year. I thought they might want to bring in a couple more vets, not, absurd amount, but Derrick Henry's been really their only signing. They've signed a couple of guys along the margins, Josh Jones being one of those guys. Now, free agency's not over. We still got time before the season. Eric DeCosta can certainly pull some strings and make some guys come in here. But to you, was this how you were expecting the offseason to go to this point, or were you expecting a little more?
It's tough to say because I think I expected them to make maybe some more, I don't want to say more significant moves, because you never know how somebody's going to contribute on a roster, no matter what position they're in. But I think I expected them to make probably some more louder moves, instead of, because they made a bunch of quiet moves, but the loudest one, of course, that being Derrick Henry. The only loud one was the Derrick Henry move. But going into this offseason, we just knew that they were going to lose a lot of people, as far as from the roster, as far as from the coaching staff too. And I feel like this offseason, they lost a lot more than they gained. But at the same time, they're overall still in a good position, because the majority of their starters, they got the majority of their starters set at pretty much every position on the roster. The only question marks, in my opinion, obviously offensive line, they got to figure that out. Wide receiver and pass rush. But other than that, the Ravens have all of their starters set, and they got some good starters throughout across the board. But yeah, I anticipated this offseason going a little bit differently, but it's not over till it's over. And like you mentioned with Eric DeCosta, he's very, very patient. Very, very patient. I know in a presser a couple of months ago, he talked about how he's not patient. But if this is not patience, then, I don't know what patience is, because he will wait it out like crazy. So and you keep hearing things about how they signed Arthur Millette late last year. They signed Jadeveon Clowney late last offseason. Even Kyle Vanoy, they signed him after week 3. So yeah, Eric DeCosta has shown like he ain't afraid to play the waiting game. So he got some opportunities to still add some veterans at some different positions. But I think training camp, they're gonna see how some stuff shakes out during training camp, and then they may make a couple of moves.
And the way that I've kind of viewed this offseason, Ingraven, is this is the year of the replacement plans, the year of the promotion, the year of the young guy, essentially. Because what last year was they drafted a draft class that I think needed a year for the most part, outside of Zay, obviously. But guys like Trenton Simpson, guys like Tavius Robinson, who did perform well last season in a much bigger role than I thought he was going to have. But even like an Andrew Voorhees, it felt like most of their draft class last season was a redshirt draft class where they went out there and they signed a bunch of those vets like you talked about. And that was the year of the veteran, where this year they have a much bigger draft class. A lot of the guys from last year's draft class are going to contribute this year, some in those starting roles, most likely, like a Simpson, Voorhees, etc. And so to me, it feels like the Ravens, they just feel super confident in their young guys. And that's what they want to roll with. Guys like Bateman, who we've talked about, Simpson, Voorhees, Rosengarten, these rookies are going to contribute a ton as well. But for a contending team, that is a bit of a risk because you don't know how many of those guys, especially when it's that many guys at so many different positions, realistically, Ingraven, some of them are going to pan out in a really big way and help this team win football games. But I don't think it's 100% realistic to expect 100% of those guys to be just like Pro Bowl, all pro guys. It's not going to happen. So for a contending team, it's a bit of a risk. It's a high risk, high reward thing, but this is how you have to build a team a little bit around a big money quarterback. And it's not all Lamar, obviously. I don't want to just like pin all that on him. Other guys have huge contracts on this team that are contributing to that. But in my opinion, they're going young. They're going to see what they have in their young guys, and they're going to evaluate that. So maybe I'd expect 1 or 2 moves here and there. But to me, it feels like they're just really seeing what they have right now.
Yeah, I think so. And that's something that a lot of us had talked about before Lamar Jackson got paid. Because obviously when your quarterback gets paid, they take up a chunk of the salary cap. And it certainly is well-deserved from Lamar Jackson. But then once your quarterback gets his money, then the general manager really has to hit that much more and that much better on those draft picks. But it's more than just drafting the right players because development is just as, if not even more important, in my opinion, than draft. But with the development, you really got to put these players to work. You got to put them in the best positions to succeed, especially because you're going to be relying on them even more now, especially because you can't spend as much money as you did before since you're paying your quarterback the big money. So, yeah, with Eric DeCosta, and like you mentioned, a lot of these draft picks, especially from last year, minus Zay, it's a big year for them. This is a big promotion time, like you talked about, because they all going to have bigger roles. And then some guys from a couple years back, too, looking to have bigger roles, too, specifically David Ojabo. I think all eyes are going to be on him to really take over. And the biggest thing with him is just staying healthy. Can he stay healthy? That's the biggest issue and the biggest question. But, yeah, Andrew Voorhees on the offensive line, a draft pick from even a couple more years back, Ben Cleveland. He could potentially be a starter for the offensive line. There's also been talk about Saleh filling in at one of those guard spots, too. So, yeah, it's a lot of depth positions that are available, some starting positions available along the O-line. But, yeah, this is a big prove year for a lot of those recent draft picks.
Yeah, and so that essentially, I think we're both in agreement, Ingraven. The short-term plan is to see what the young guys have while still staying in contention with enough veteran moves along the edges, like a Derrick Henry, for example. But it's such a delicate balance. And, I mean, Eric DeCosta has to figure out how to manage short-term expectations with long-term expectations and the plans. Because if you have a lot of guys that hit on these rookie deals, especially rookies and second-year guys, that's 3, 4, 5 years of pretty cost controllable guys that you can say they're not going to take up a big part of this cap for a while. We can kind of ride things out, and then you have more ability to add around the margins. And look, at the end of the day, as long as they have Lamar Ingraven, they have a chance. Every single year that Lamar can stay healthy and give them what they need, they have a shot. You can build teams around Lamar Jackson that can work, and there are plenty of different iterations you can build. But they still have a really young core with Lamar, Kyle Hamilton, Linderbaum, Flowers, Roquan. Everybody thinks Roquan is like 32 years old. He's like 27. He's not that old. He's not that old. So you have a good core. They're a well-known drafting team. I think the long-term prospects, especially if they continue to hit on their picks as much as they have, as long as they have Lamar, it will be okay.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. Yeah, Lamar always gives you a shot, even when it seems like you don't have a shot. I just remember in 2021, where literally everybody's dropping. Before the season started, while the season was going on, everybody was getting hurt. But while Lamar was healthy, he had them the number one team in the AFC. But then, unfortunately, he ended up getting hurt too. So, but my point in saying that is that he had this team in a place where it seemed like they shouldn't have even been there because so many guys were hurt on the roster. But yeah, Lamar Jackson, as long as he's healthy, you definitely got a chance.
Yeah, 100%. And speaking of, Lamar ends up going into training camp on Monday, setting the tone a little early for these guys, which is, it's always nice to see Lamar walk in the building. Ingraven, we talked about it beforehand, but I'm just excited to see guys back at the facility. No more off-season talk, although it'll still trickle in, I'm sure, here and there. But training camp pops up. It's a big year for the Ravens. What are you looking for? Are there any specific players, positional battles you're looking forward to watching and that you really think can define this season for the Ravens early on?
I mean, obviously Rashad Bateman, that's one of the big ones. But to go in a different direction, I would say seeing how they deployed these cornerbacks, seeing exactly how they use them. We know that Marlon Humphrey, he'll be a starter. Brandon Stevens will be expected to be a starter as well. But how will they incorporate Nate Wiggins early on training camp and then, of course, throughout the regular season? That's one of the things that I'm looking forward to seeing. And also with Tez Walker, you hear so many great things about him, hear about his speed, his size, him being able to high point the ball. How will they use him? Will the Baltimore Ravens get it to a point where if he's on the field, it's obvious that the ball is going to go his way? Or will they just design stuff to where he may be on the field and he could be a decoy? Of course, we want the ball to go his way as well, but will they be able to sort of sneak him in there sometimes to catch defenses off guard and not make stuff so obvious? So I'm just really excited to see how they incorporate those two guys into their game plan and then just how they make it all gel.
Yeah, and one more guy I'll throw into the mix here. I think a guy I'm looking forward to seeing is Darius Washington. Seems like the Ravens have hyped him up all offseason, and they have not brought in a Geno Stone replacement. It really does feel like unless they want to fork up the money for Justin Simmons or go out there and get another guy, it's going to be Darius kind of filling into that role, who, by the way, was a safety at TCU. Was exceptional, was supposed to be a 3rd to 4th round draft pick, fell undrafted most likely because of the height concerns, because he's on the smaller side, but he's a heck of a player. Just hasn't been able to showcase what he's been able to do because of injuries and staying on the field. But this season, and look, Geno was a 7th round pick, and everybody's like, okay, what's the 7th round pick going to do? But guess what? He came out there and he produced. And I think for Darius Washington, he could certainly have that path as well. So the Ravens, they'll be all right. Brandon Aiyuk or not, they will be okay. Now, the Aiyuk move, would it be awesome? Yeah. Is it realistic? At this point, I'm not so sure. But, of course, it's a great conversation. And Ingraven, always great conversation with you. Appreciate you hopping on with me. Please tell people where they can find you and what you're working on as training camp comes up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I appreciate you having me on. You can find us on IngravenVids. That's a YouTube channel. That's Twitter, Instagram. All of that good stuff. And we're just trying to keep up with these Ravens. They always giving us something to keep up with. We're just going to keep it pushing, keep it moving, just like the Baltimore Ravens do. So very, very much gracious for you having me on. Thanks as always. And this is my first time being on since you got the new intro music. So I like
yeah, we switched it up a couple of months ago, maybe a month ago or so. And yeah, it's another. I know you're the hype music intro guy, so hopefully it's up to your standards, and you can jam out in the background for all the times you come on. But appreciate you as always, Ingraven. Be sure to go follow Ingraven like his work, subscribe to his channel. He does a great job, and the links, of course, in the description down below. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, follow along in audio form as well for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Coming up tomorrow, we got more Ravens content for you. Stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.